Have you ever walked into a room and felt invisible before you even said a word? Like people looked right through you because of what
Wow,
you were
Dad, look
wearing,
at all these
or the
cars.
car you
Pretty
drove,
cool, right?
or
See
the
anything you
number
like?
in your bank
That
account.
black one.
The sound hit the marble floor like a gunshot. Crystal shattered. Water exploded outward in a wide, glittering arc, catching the light from the chandeliers overhead like diamonds scattered across polished stone. The entire showroom went silent, salespeople frozen, mid-pitch customers, mid-sentence. Even the soft jazz piping through the ceiling speakers seemed to hold its breath. And standing in the center of it all, shoes soaking wet water dripping down the side of his khaki pants, was James Martinez. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't look down at his ruined shoes or ball his fists the way most men would when a woman had just thrown water at their feet in front of a room full of strangers. He simply looked at Melissa Rodriguez, senior sales executive, top closer for 4 years, running the woman currently holding the now empty glass, and said quietly, "I'd still like to hear the engine." But here's what nobody in that showroom knew. Outside in the parking lot, pressed against the window of a 2015 Honda Accord, a 9-year-old girl named Ashley Martinez watched her father get humiliated, and she didn't understand why the people inside were laughing. What Melissa didn't know, what nobody in that dealership knew, was exactly who they had just thrown water on. And by tomorrow morning, every single person in that room would wish they could take back the last 2 hours of their lives. Drop a comment right now with your city. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because what happens next is going to blow your mind. 2 hours earlier, James Martinez drove his 2015 Honda Accord down Interstate 84. His daughter Ashley buckled into the passenger seat beside him. The odometer read 132,847 miles. The car was clean, but worn, the kind of vehicle that said reliable and practical, and absolutely nothing about the man behind the wheel. "Daddy, are we really going to see the ocean car?" Ashley's voice carried that particular brightness only 9-year-olds possess when they're about to experience something they've been dreaming about for weeks. James glanced at her and smiled, the kind of smile that started in his chest and worked its way up. "We're going to see if they'll show us the ocean car, Ashley Bug. And if I sit in it, will I really see fish inside?" The laugh came from somewhere deep. "No fish, baby. But the color, it's the deepest blue you've ever seen, like the Mariana Trench we read about in your science book." Ashley's eyes went wide. "The one that's 7 miles deep?" "That's the one." She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the trees rushing past their autumn leaves bright with October color. "Then, Daddy, is it expensive?" James's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "It is, sweetheart. More expensive than our house. A lot more expensive than our house." Ashley processed this information the way children do, turning it over in her mind like a smooth stone found on a beach. At 9 years old, she was beginning to understand how money worked, how it separated people into categories, those who had it and those who didn't. She didn't know yet which category her father belonged to. James had been very careful about that. "Your birthday's in 3 weeks. Daddy wants to get you something special." "I don't need the car, Daddy." Ashley's response came quickly, almost urgently. "I just want to sit in it once, just once, to see if it feels like the ocean." Something tightened in James's chest, the particular ache that comes when your child asks for something so small and reasonable that it breaks your heart they even have to ask. "You deserve to sit in any car you want, sweetheart." James Martinez was 41 years old, though he could pass for younger when he smiled and older when he was tired. Today he looked exactly 41. He wore a white button-down shirt that had been washed so many times the collar had gone soft at the edges. The shirt was clean-pressed even, but unmistakably old, the kind of old that comes from years of wear, not from fashion. His khaki pants were Dockers purchased from Target 3 years ago, still serviceable, but showing their age at the knees. Brown leather shoes, scuffed at the toes, polished but not new. No watch, no jewelry. No wedding ring. He'd stopped wearing it 2 years after his wife left when Ashley was 5, and stopped asking where Mommy was. His hands resting on the steering wheel were the hands of a man who had worked, really worked. There were small calluses at the base of his fingers, faint scars across 2 knuckles, the permanent shadow of oil that never quite washed out from under his nails no matter how hard he scrubbed. 10 years as a mechanic will do that to you. He'd been 23 when he started at Rodriguez Brothers Auto Repair in Houston. Fresh out of trade school, eager good with his hands, he'd spent a decade under hoods oil-stained and back-aching, learning every system, every sound, every way a car could break, and how to fix it. At 33, he'd done something most mechanics only dream about. He'd bought a failing dealership, used every penny of his savings, took a loan that terrified him, worked 18-hour days for 2 years straight. He'd turned it around, made it profitable, sold it 3 years later for twice what he'd paid, bought a second dealership, then a third. 8 months ago, he'd made the biggest purchase of his life, Crown Luxury Motors in Portland, Oregon. A high-end showroom premium clientele, the kind of place that sold cars most people only saw in magazines. But he hadn't announced the purchase, hadn't done the press release, the staff meet and greet, the corporate photo. The previous owner had handled the transition paperwork remotely, and James had requested his name be kept off all internal communications until he was ready. Because James Martinez had learned something in his 3 dealerships, you can't fix a culture problem from the top down. You have to see it from the bottom up. You have to walk in like a customer and watch how your people treat someone who doesn't look like money. Today was that test. James pulled into the parking lot at 2:03 p.m. Crown Luxury Motors sat on a corner lot in Portland's Pearl District, all glass and steel and deliberate elegance. Through the massive windows, he could see the cars inside, 30 of them, maybe more, arranged like art pieces under precision LED lighting. Wow. Ashley's breath fogged the window as she pressed her face against it. Pretty impressive, huh? It looks like a museum. Kind of is. James turned off the engine, pulled the key from the ignition. Ashley, I need you to remember something. She looked at him, suddenly serious. Kids have a way of knowing when their parents are about to say something important. The people inside are going to look at us and make some guesses about who we are, about what we can afford, about whether we belong there. Ashley frowned. But we're just people. We are. But sometimes grown-ups forget that. They forget to look at who people really are. They only look at what people are wearing or what kind of car they drove or whether they have an appointment. That's not fair. No, baby. It's not. So why are we going in? James looked at his daughter, this smart, brave, ocean-loving girl who deserved to sit in every beautiful car she ever wanted to see, and he made a decision. Because I want to see if the people who work for me know how to treat people who walk through their door. And if they don't, Daddy's going to teach them. Ashley didn't fully understand, but she nodded. Okay, Daddy. They got out of the car. James took Ashley's hand. Together they walked toward the entrance of Crown Luxury Motors. The doors to Crown Luxury Motors were heavy, the kind that require a deliberate push, the kind that announce your arrival with weight and intention. James pushed one open and immediately felt the temperature change. Inside was cool, controlled 68 degrees, exactly the kind of temperature that costs money to maintain. The showroom floor opened up before them, 20-foot ceilings, Italian marble so polished it looked wet. Cars arranged in perfect geometric precision. Chandeliers hung overhead, each one probably worth more than James's Honda. And standing just inside the entrance, positioned like a checkpoint, was Gary Torres. Gary was 56 years old, 6'2", 240 pounds, with the posture of a man who had spent 20 years in law enforcement before taking a security job that paid better and required less paperwork. He wore a dark suit, a radio clipped to his belt, and an expression that said he'd already made several decisions about the man and child walking through the door. Help you with something. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. James looked up at him without breaking stride. I'm here to look at cars. Gary's eyes traveled down the length of James, then over to Ashley, then back up. Slow, deliberate. The kind of once-over designed to make you feel it. This is a private showroom. You got an appointment. The door was open. I don't need an appointment to walk into a business. Most of our clients schedule in advance. Most. Not all. Gary didn't move from the center of the entrance. What kind of vehicle are you looking for? It was a test. James knew it was a test. He'd seen this exact move at his Houston location, his Dallas location. Security guards and receptionists and sales managers who asked that question as a filter, "What kind of vehicle are you looking for?" because the answer told them whether you were worth their time. "The most expensive one you have." Ashley squeezed his hand. Gary's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "The most expensive one. That's right. And you're aware of the price range we carry here?" "I'm aware." A pause. Gary pulled his radio from his belt, pressed the button. "Got a walk-in. White shirt, khakis, kid in tow, asking about top-tier inventory." The radio crackled back. "Copy that. Keep an eye." Gary stepped aside. Barely. Just enough for James and Ashley to pass if they turned sideways. "Have a look around." It didn't sound like an invitation. James took Ashley's hand and walked past him into the cool, controlled air of Crown Luxury Motors. Melissa Rodriguez was 34 years old, 5'7" in her Louboutin heels, and dressed in a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than James's entire outfit. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular way that looks effortless, but requires 45 minutes and $200 worth of product. Diamond studs in her ears. Real diamonds, 2 carats each, a gift to herself after her best sales year. She sat at her desk near the east wall reviewing her client list for the afternoon when she looked up and saw James and Ashley enter. She took in the white shirt, old, the khakis Target, the shoes scuffed, the child cute but clearly not part of the usual Crown Luxury demographic. She leaned toward Daniel Nguyen, the associate sitting across from her. Daniel was 35, sharp, hungry, competitive in the way salespeople are when their commission depends on it. "Walk in. No appointment." Daniel glanced up, assessed James in 3 seconds flat. "Seriously, Gary just radioed. What's he asking for? Top tier, apparently." Daniel snorted. "Top tier. In those pants." Melissa smiled. Not a kind smile, a knowing smile, the smile of someone who had learned to sort people quickly and efficiently because time was money and money was everything. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward James. Not with the energy of a salesperson approaching a customer, with the energy of a property manager approaching someone who might be in the wrong building. "Sir, can I help you?" James was looking at a car to his left, a deep navy Grand Tourer, sleek and low and probably $400,000 on a good day. He tilted his head slightly, studying the rear quarter panel the way someone studies a painting they're not sure they like yet. "I hope so." He turned toward Melissa. "I want to see your most expensive car." Melissa blinked. "Once. Fast. Our most expensive car." "Yes. And you're aware of the price range we carry here." It was the second time someone had asked him that question in 5 minutes. James looked at her steadily. "I'm aware." Melissa studied him. There was a pause that stretched a beat too long, the kind of pause people fill with judgment they haven't quite decided to voice out loud yet. "Of course. Right this way." Melissa led them to the back of the showroom where Crown Luxury's crown jewel sat behind a low velvet rope on a raised platform. It was a limited production hypercar, one of 11 made imported from Italy, painted in a color that existed somewhere between black and the deep indigo of a midnight sky at sea. The kind of car that didn't just move. It threatened to move even standing still. "The GT Serpente?" Ashley gasped. "Daddy, it's—" "I know, baby. It really does look like the ocean." The price on this car, not displayed anywhere but known to every staff member who worked the floor, was $2.4 million. Melissa stood beside it, arms loosely crossed. "This is our flagship piece. It's a 1 of 11 limited production. There are currently 3 buyers on a waiting list." James walked around the car slowly. He didn't reach out to touch it, not yet. He just looked at it with the same steady attention he'd given the Grand Tourer near the entrance. His eyes moved over the lines of it the way the bodywork curved low at the nose and rose at the haunches, the tiny imperfections in the paint that weren't imperfections at all, but the natural depth of a hand-applied finish. "Can I hear it run?" Melissa's expression shifted. Something flashed behind her eyes, not quite amusement, not quite contempt, something that lived in the space between them. "We don't typically start vehicles for browse customers. Our standard process is to schedule a formal test drive after verifying I'm not asking for a test drive. I'm asking to hear it run. That's not something we do." Her voice had gone flatter now, the professional warmth dialed down like a thermostat. "I can show you our brochure, and if you'd like to schedule a proper appointment, it's the GT Serpenti, correct? 1 of 11 produced. 8.0-liter quad-turbo V12. 1,200 horsepower. 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds. Top speed electronically limited to 261 miles per hour, though the engine is capable of more." Melissa stared at him. "Carbon ceramic brakes. Active aerodynamics. 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. Curb weight 3,200 pounds. The color is called Midnight Adriatico, and it's a proprietary paint that requires 17 coats and 43 hours to apply properly." Ashley looked up at her father, surprised. She didn't know he knew all this. James looked back at Melissa. "So yes, I know the car. Can we hear it run?" Melissa recovered quickly. "Sir, regardless of your familiarity with the specifications, our policy remains. Who's the manager on duty today?" "Excuse me." "The manager. I'd like to speak with them." Melissa's chin came up slightly. "Mr. Walker manages this showroom. He's currently in a meeting and not available to—" "That's all right. I can wait." There was a small waiting area near the front of the showroom. 4 low chairs arranged around a glass table, the kind of chairs that are beautiful and uncomfortable in equal measure. They were designed, James knew, to make you feel like you were being given something exclusive while simultaneously making you eager to leave. James and Ashley sat. Ashley's feet didn't quite reach the floor. "Daddy, why won't they show us the car?" James looked at his daughter. 9 years old, smart enough to see she was being treated differently. Not quite old enough to understand why. Sometimes people make assumptions, baby. It's not about us, it's about them. Did we do something wrong? The question hit him harder than it should have. "No, sweetheart, we did nothing wrong." Ashley nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She swung her legs back and forth, looking around the showroom. Other customers, a couple in their 50s looking at a Mercedes, a younger man in an expensive suit examining a Porsche, were being attended to immediately. Sales associates brought them water, coffee, brochures. No one brought James and Ashley anything. At the 15-minute mark, Ashley whispered, "Daddy, I'm thirsty." James looked around. There was a side table near Melissa's desk with a carafe of water and several crystal glasses. He could see it clearly. A woman in her 60s, another customer, had just been poured a glass by Daniel and Gwen. "Let's wait a bit longer, Ashley Bug." Okay. She was being patient. She was being good. She was being everything a 9-year-old shouldn't have to be in a situation like this. James pulled out his phone. He opened his messages and texted Christopher Allen, his attorney and COO. "It's worse than I thought. Prepare the paperwork. I'm giving them one more chance." Christopher's response came back immediately. How bad? James looked at Ashley, swinging her legs, trying to be patient. Bad enough. At the 30-minute mark, James stood. Ashley looked up at him hopefully. "Are we leaving, Daddy?" "Not yet, baby. I'm going to try one more time." He walked back to Melissa's desk. She was on her computer typing something. She didn't look up. "Excuse me." Melissa finished whatever she was typing, took her time with it, and then looked up. "Yes. Is Mr. Walker available yet?" "Still in his meeting." "How much longer do you think that will be?" Melissa's expression didn't change. "I couldn't say." James felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was something colder, something more patient. "We've been waiting 30 minutes. My daughter is thirsty. Could someone bring us some water while we wait?" Melissa glanced over at Ashley, then back at James. Of course. But she didn't move to get the water. She didn't signal anyone else to get it either. "Thank you." He walked back to Ashley and sat down. 5 more minutes passed. No water came. Daniel Nguyen and Nicole Davis, a younger associate who'd been with Crown Luxury for 6 months, were standing near the import section. They weren't speaking loudly, but they weren't whispering either. Their voices carried just enough. "How long do you think he's going to wait?" Daniel glanced over at James and Ashley. "I don't know. Maybe he thinks if he waits long enough the price will drop." Nicole bit her lip, trying not to laugh. "On a Serpent." Sure. Let me just knock $2 million off for the patient man in the Walmart outfit. Ashley heard them. James saw her hear them. He watched his daughter's face as she processed the words, not fully understanding them, but understanding enough to know they were about her father. Daddy, can we go outside for a minute? Yeah, baby. Let's get some fresh air. They stood in the parking lot, Ashley's hand in his. The October air was cool. Trees across the street were bright with red and gold leaves. Daddy, why are they being mean? James knelt down to her level. Ashley, I need to explain something to you. She looked at him with those serious 9-year-old eyes. Sometimes people look at someone and they decide right away, without knowing anything about them, what kind of person they are. They look at what you're wearing or what car you drove or whether you have an appointment, and they make a judgment. But that's not fair. No, it's not. You're a good person, Daddy. You're the best person. James felt his throat tighten. Thank you, sweetheart. So why don't they know that? Because they never asked. Ashley thought about this. Are we going back inside? James looked at the showroom through the glass doors. He could see Melissa at her desk, Daniel and Nicole still talking, Gary Torres near the entrance. He thought about the envelope in his pocket, the business card, the handwritten note he'd prepared this morning just in case. Yes, we're going back inside one more time. James and Ashley returned to their seats. Ashley needed to use the bathroom. James asked Melissa where it was, and Melissa pointed toward the back without making eye contact. While Ashley was in the bathroom, James sat alone in the waiting area. He watched the showroom operate around him, watched Melissa close a deal with an older gentleman in an expensive suit, watched Daniel and Gwen show a young couple the Mercedes-AMG, watched Nicole Davis organize brochures at the reception desk. Everyone had something to do. Everyone except attend to the man who'd been waiting for 45 minutes. Ashley came back from the bathroom. Can we see the car now, Daddy? Let's ask one more time. They walked to Melissa's desk together. Melissa looked up, and this time James saw something cross her face. Not guilt, not shame, but irritation. The look of someone who has decided you are wasting their time and wants you to know it. Mr. Walker, is he available, sir? And now there was nothing professional in her voice at all. I've explained our policy. We prioritize serious buyers. If you'd like to leave your contact information, we can reach out when... We've been waiting 45 minutes. James's voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. My daughter asked to see a car. She's 9 years old. She loves the color blue. We've been sitting in those chairs for 45 minutes and not once has anyone offered us water or a brochure or even basic courtesy. I'm very sorry you feel that way. The words were right. The tone was not. I'd like to speak with Mr. Walker, please. What happened next happened quickly, but James would replay it in his mind 1,000 times afterward, and he would never be quite sure if it was deliberate or if Melissa's subconscious made a decision her conscious mind hadn't approved yet. Melissa stood. She walked to the side table, the one with the carafe of water. She poured a glass. Then she started walking back toward her desk past James and Ashley. And whether it was intentional or not, whether it was calculated or whether it was the kind of thing a person does when they're used to not being watched by anyone who matters. Melissa's arm moved as she walked past. The glass tilted. Water splashed across the floor at James's feet and across his shoes, and up his pant legs, soaking the khaki fabric from ankle to mid-calf. The glass slipped from Melissa's hand and hit the marble floor. The sound was enormous. Crystal exploded. Shards scattered across the polished tile. The crash echoed through the entire showroom like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. And Ashley Martinez, 9 years old, standing 2 feet from her father, jumped back with a small scream as glass shards flew past her feet. Daniel Nguyen, halfway across the showroom, stopped mid-sentence and laughed. A real laugh, the kind that gets away from you. Nicole Davis covered her mouth, but her eyes were smiling. 2 men near the entrance turned to look, then turned away quickly, embarrassed for James, but not embarrassed enough to say anything. Gary Torres watched from his position by the door, his expression unreadable. And Melissa Rodriguez, senior sales executive, Crown Luxury Motors top closer for 4 years running, stood holding the now empty glass and said, "Oops." She set what remained of the glass on the edge of the nearest display stand with a small deliberate click. Clumsy me. Ashley looked at her father's soaking pants. She looked at the broken glass on the floor. She looked at the people around the showroom, some staring, some pretending not to stare, some actively smiling. "Daddy." Her voice was small and confused and hurt in a way that 9-year-olds shouldn't have to be hurt. Why did she do that? James knelt down his wet pants, making a soft, squelching sound, and looked his daughter in the eyes. "It's okay, Ashley. I'm okay. But you're all wet." "I know, baby. It's just water. It'll dry." She did it on purpose. It wasn't a question. James didn't lie to his daughter. He never had. I think maybe she did. Why? How do you explain cruelty to a 9-year-old? How do you explain the particular kind of cruelty that comes from someone who has decided you don't matter? Sometimes people forget that being kind is more important than being right. Ashley looked at Melissa, who was now wiping imaginary water off her blazer. Then she looked back at her father. "I want to go home, Daddy." At that moment, standing there soaking wet with his daughter, scared beside him with a room full of people who had judged him in 30 seconds and found him worthless, James Martinez did something that would change every single person in that building. James stood. Water dripped from his pants, pooling around his shoes. He looked at Melissa. He looked at Daniel, who was trying to stop smiling and failing. He looked at Nicole, who had turned away. He looked at Gary Torres, who was watching everything with the expression of someone who had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. And James Martinez, standing in a puddle of water in the showroom of the dealership he owned, made a decision. "I'd still like to speak with the manager." The room went quieter, if that was possible. Melissa stared at him. "Sir, I think it would be best if you're not going to finish that sentence." Melissa blinked. "Excuse me. Because if you finish that sentence, you're going to say something that's very difficult to walk back from. And you've already said enough." James looked across the showroom. There was a young man standing near the edge of the floor, late 20s, dark-haired, wearing a gray suit that looked like it came from Men's Warehouse but fit him well. He wore a name tag that said Brandon Flores in small, neat letters. Brandon had been watching the whole thing. He was the only person on the floor who hadn't laughed. He hadn't looked away either. Not with discomfort, but with something closer to attention, like a person trying to understand what he was witnessing. James walked toward him, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the marble. "Brandon." Brandon straightened. "Yes, sir. How long have you been working here?" Brandon glanced once toward Melissa, almost involuntarily, the way junior employees glance toward senior staff when they're not sure if they're allowed to answer a question, then back at James. "About 6 months, sir." James reached into the inside pocket of his white shirt. Not a jacket. There was no jacket, just the shirt, and pulled out a white envelope. Small, sealed with 4 words written on the front in clean block letters. He held it out to Brandon. "When Mr. Walker is finished with his meeting, could you give him this? When you have a moment alone with him." Brandon looked at the envelope. He looked at James. He looked at the 4 words written on the front. "Open this alone tonight." Brandon took the envelope carefully, like it might contain something that could bite. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure he gets it." "Thank you, Brandon. And then, because it mattered, I appreciate your courtesy." Something passed between them in that moment. Brandon didn't know what it was. Wouldn't know until tonight when he opened the envelope in his apartment and read what was inside. But he felt it, the weight of something significant being handed to him. "You're welcome, sir." James took Ashley's hand. They walked toward the door. Gary Torres stepped aside before James reached him. He didn't know why he did it. Didn't decide to. His body just moved, creating space the way you move for someone who has somehow earned passage without asking for it. James nodded once at Gary. Gary nodded back. James pushed open the heavy glass door. The October air hit him cool and clean after the controlled climate of the showroom. Ashley's hand was warm in his. They walked to the Honda Accord. James opened the passenger door for Ashley, helped her climb in, buckled her seatbelt. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby. Are those people going to be okay?" James paused. It was such an Ashley question, worrying about the people who had just been cruel to her father. I think they're going to learn something important tomorrow, and learning important things is sometimes uncomfortable. Like when I learned long division. James smiled despite everything. Exactly like that. He closed her door, walked around to the driver's side and got in. The Honda's engine started with its familiar, reliable sound. James pulled out of the parking lot, merged into traffic, and drove away. Behind them, Crown Luxury Motors continued its afternoon. Sales associates returned to their clients. Gary Torres resumed his position by the door. Melissa Rodriguez went back to her desk and opened her client management software. And Brandon Flores stood near the edge of the showroom floor, holding a white envelope, reading 4 words over and over: "Open this alone tonight." "What do you think was in the envelope?" Melissa asked Daniel as she sat down at her desk. Daniel shrugged, grinning. "Probably a strongly worded letter." "Dear Manager, your staff was mean to me. Sincerely, the man in the Target pants." Melissa laughed. "Or a prayer card. Jesus loves you even if your employees don't." They laughed again. It felt good to laugh. It felt like the tension of the afternoon was breaking. Nicole walked past, heard them laughing, smiled uncertainly. She didn't join in, but she didn't object either. Nobody thought to check the security footage. Nobody thought to call Robert Walker out of his meeting, which wasn't really a meeting at all, just Robert in his office reviewing quarterly reports and avoiding the floor because he'd had a headache since lunch. Nobody thought to ask Brandon what else was written on that envelope besides those 4 words. Nobody thought to wonder why a man in an old white shirt and wet pants knew the exact specifications of a $2.4 million hypercar. They just went back to work. And Brandon Flores slipped the envelope carefully into his jacket pocket, where it would stay for the rest of the afternoon, pressing against his chest like a second heartbeat. James didn't drive away immediately. He sat in the parking lot of Crown Luxury Motors for 3 full minutes, engine running, hands on the steering wheel. Ashley was quiet in the passenger seat. Too quiet. "Ashley, talk to me, baby. What are you thinking?" Ashley didn't answer right away. She was looking out the window back at the showroom. Through the glass she could see Melissa at her desk, could see Daniel talking to another sales associate, could see the world inside continuing as if nothing important had happened. "I'm thinking that I'm sorry." James's heart dropped. He turned in his seat to face her. "Sorry, baby. Why are you sorry?" "Because I wanted to see the car. And they were mean to you because of me." "Ashley, if I hadn't asked to see it, we wouldn't have gone there. And that lady wouldn't have thrown the water. And you wouldn't be all wet. And Ashley..." "Stop." James's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me, sweetheart." Ashley turned. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. She was trying to be brave. "What happened in there had nothing to do with you. Do you understand? Nothing. That was about grown-ups forgetting how to be kind. That was about people making judgments before they knew anything real. That was about them, not you. But do you remember what Mommy used to say about mean people?" Ashley nodded slowly. "She said people are mean when they're scared." "That's right. And you know what? Your mama was right about that." What are they scared of? James thought about how to answer that. How to explain to a 9-year-old that sometimes people are scared of being wrong, scared of looking foolish, scared of treating someone kindly and then discovering that person was nobody important and they wasted their kindness. They're scared that if they're nice to everyone, they won't have enough niceness left for the people who matter. But that's not how niceness works. Being kind doesn't run out. The more you use it, the more you have. Ashley thought about this. So they were wrong. They were very wrong. "Are you going to yell at them?" James smiled. "No, baby. I'm going to do something better than yelling. What I'm going to teach them. And sometimes teaching someone is harder than yelling at them because teaching means they have to understand what they did wrong. And understanding is harder than just being told." Ashley nodded like she understood, even though James wasn't sure she fully did. That was okay. She would understand someday. Maybe when she was older. Maybe when she was his age and looking back at this moment from a distance of years and experience. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah, baby. We can go home." James drove and thought. He thought about the showroom, About Melissa's face when she'd said, "Oops." About Daniel's laugh. About Gary Torres stepping into the center of the entrance like a barrier. About Robert Walker's meeting that was really just him avoiding his floor. He thought about Brandon Flores standing there with that envelope, the only person in the building who hadn't participated in the cruelty, the only person who had looked at James with something like respect. That's the one. That's the one who gets it. He thought about the note inside the envelope. He'd written it this morning at his kitchen table while Ashley ate her cereal while she was distracted by her iPad and not paying attention to what her father was doing. The note said, "Brandon, the man who gave you this envelope is the owner of Crown Luxury Motors. He bought the dealership 8 months ago to observe how employees treat customers who don't arrive in expensive suits. Today, you were the only person who didn't laugh when his 9-year-old daughter watched her father get humiliated. Tomorrow morning, deliver this note to Robert Walker before 9 a.m. Do not tell anyone else. What happens next depends on how your manager responds. James Martinez, CEO Hayes, Automotive Group." The business card in the envelope said the same thing, just with more formality, James Martinez, CEO and founder Hayes Automotive Group. And below that, in smaller print, owner Crown Luxury Motors, Portland, Houston Premium Auto, Dallas Executive Imports. James had debated whether to include his full title, debated whether CEO was too much, whether it would look like showing off, but Christopher Allen, his attorney, had insisted. They humiliated you in front of your daughter. They don't get the soft version. They get the full title and the full weight. Let them sit with what they did. Christopher was right. James pulled into the driveway of their house at 6:47 p.m. It was a modest 3-bedroom in Portland's Sellwood neighborhood, nice enough, comfortable, but nothing that screamed wealth. The Honda fit right in with the other cars on the street. The house had a small front yard, a 2-car garage, a basketball hoop over the garage door that James had installed when Ashley was 6 and decided she wanted to be a basketball player. That phase had lasted 3 months before she'd discovered marine biology. James carried Ashley inside. She woke up halfway through, groggy and disoriented. "We home, Daddy." "We're home, baby. I'm hungry. Let's get you some dinner." He made her chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, her favorite comfort food. She ate at the kitchen table while he stood at the counter, still in his damp pants, and poured himself a glass of water, real water, from the tap, in a regular glass. He drank it standing up, thinking about crystal glasses and marble floors and the sound of laughter in a room that should have been silent. After Ashley went to bed at 8:30, James sat in his home office, the small second bedroom he'd converted into a workspace, and called Christopher Allen. "Did you go?" "I went." "And worse than Houston, worse than Dallas." Jesus. What happened, James told him, all of it. The security guard blocking them, Melissa's dismissiveness, the 45-minute wait. The water. She threw water at you, in front of Ashley. Ashley was standing right there. Christopher was silent for a moment. Then, "Okay, we're doing this. What do you need?" "I need the ownership paperwork ready for tomorrow. All of it. Transfer documents, corporate structure, everything that shows I own Crown Luxury. I need 4 vehicles ready, the Serpente, plus 3 others for the parking lot. I need you and the legal team at the dealership at 10 a.m. And I need you to call Robert Walker at 8 a.m. tomorrow and tell him to review the security footage from 2:10 p.m. to 3:50 p.m. today before we arrive. What are you going to do to Walker? I'm going to reassign him. Service Center, East Portland. Intake Desk. And Melissa Rodriguez probation. Customer service training. Commission adjustment. One more incident and she's gone. And the kid, the one who took the envelope, Brandon Flores. I'm promoting him to assistant general manager." Christopher didn't respond immediately. Then James, "He's been there 6 months. You're going to promote someone with 6 months' experience over people who've been there for years. He's the only one who didn't laugh. Christopher, that's all the experience I need to know about." "Fair enough. I'll have everything ready by 9 a.m. "Thank you." "James." "Yeah, how's Ashley?" James looked at the doorway toward Ashley's bedroom down the hall. He could see her nightlight glowing, a little plastic sea turtle that projected blue waves on her ceiling. "She apologized to me. She said she was sorry for asking to see the car. She thought it was her fault." "Ah, hell. Yeah, You know what you're doing tomorrow, that's for her too. You know that, right? I know. Good. I'll see you at 10. James hung up. He sat in his office for another hour, staring at the wall, thinking about his daughter, apologizing for wanting to see something beautiful, thinking about the way Melissa had said, "Oops," thinking about the sound of glass shattering on marble. At 11:30 p.m. he went to bed. He didn't sleep much. Across town in a studio apartment in Portland's Pearl District, Brandon Flores opened a white envelope and read 6 lines that made his hands shake. Then he read the business card. Then he sat on the edge of his bed for 3 hours, staring at the wall, trying to understand what was about to happen tomorrow. He didn't sleep either. Brandon Flores lived in a studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had been renovated from a warehouse in 2018. 400 square feet, clean, organized. The kind of space that belonged to someone who didn't have much but took care of what they had. A bed against one wall, a small kitchenette, a desk under the window with a laptop and a stack of business management textbooks from Portland Community College. And on the wall above the desk, a photo of a woman in her 60s smiling at the camera wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Mom." Brandon had been staring at that photo for the past 20 minutes. He sat on the edge of his bed, still in his work clothes, gray suit, white shirt tie half loosened, and held the white envelope in his hands. The envelope James Martinez had given him 8 hours ago. Open this alone tonight. He'd waited. He'd finished his shift at Crown Luxury. He'd driven home. He had made himself dinner pasta with marinara sauce from a jar, nothing fancy. He'd tried to watch TV, couldn't focus, kept looking at his jacket hanging on the back of the door, the envelope in the inside pocket. At 10:47 p.m. he finally opened it. 2 things inside. First, a business card, cream-colored, simple, expensive paper. The kind of paper that communicated serious money without needing to announce it. James Martinez, CEO and founder, Hayes Automotive Group. Below that, owner Crown Luxury Motors, Portland Houston Premium Auto, Dallas Executive Imports, a phone number, an email address. Nothing else. Brandon stared at the card. Read it 3 times. His brain was trying to process what his eyes were seeing. James Martinez, the man in the white shirt and khakis, the man with the 9-year-old daughter, the man Melissa Rodriguez had thrown water on, CEO and founder, owner Crown Luxury Motors Portland. Oh my God. The words came out loud in his empty apartment. Oh my God. Second, a handwritten note, 6 lines, blue ink, the same neat block letters as the words on the front of the envelope. Brandon, the man who gave you this envelope, is the owner of Crown Luxury Motors. He bought the dealership 8 months ago to observe how employees treat customers who don't arrive in expensive suits. Today you were the only person who didn't laugh when his 9-year-old daughter watched her father get humiliated. Tomorrow morning, deliver this note to Robert Walker before 9 a.m. Do not tell anyone else. What happens next depends on how your manager responds. James Martinez. Brandon read it once, twice, 3 times. Then he sat very, very still. Brandon Flores was 29 years old. He'd been born in Portland, raised in Portland, never lived anywhere else. His mother, Sarah Flores, had been a dental hygienist for 30 years before the first stroke hit when Brandon was 26. She'd survived that one, spent 6 months in rehab learning to walk again, to speak clearly again. Brandon had been in his 4th semester at Portland Community College when it happened. Business management degree. He was going to finish, going to get his associates, maybe transfer to Portland State for a bachelor's. Maybe. But his mom needed him. Her insurance covered the hospital, covered the rehab, but it didn't cover the bills that kept coming, the mortgage, the utilities, the car payment, the groceries. So Brandon had done what people do when someone they love needs them. He'd dropped out. He'd gotten a job at a budget dealership in Gresham East Side Auto, selling used Hondas and Toyotas to people who needed reliable transportation and couldn't afford much else. He'd been good at it. He was patient. He listened. He didn't push people toward cars they couldn't afford. He treated every customer like they mattered because his mother had taught him that everyone matters. Baby, do the thing that costs something. The cheap things never last. He'd worked at East Side Auto for 3 years. His mother had survived another 2 years before the second stroke hit. That one she didn't survive. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Brandon's manager at Eastside Auto, a man named Terry who wore too much cologne and laughed too loud, had let Brandon leave early but docked his pay for the hours. Policy is policy. Brandon had quit 3 weeks later. He'd applied to Crown Luxury Motors on a whim. Didn't think he'd get it. They wanted experienced luxury sales professionals, and he'd spent 3 years selling certified pre-owned Camrys. But someone in HR must have liked something about his resume because they'd called him for an interview. Robert Walker had interviewed him, had barely looked at him, had asked 3 questions, and then, "We'll let you know." 2 days later, Brandon got the offer. Base salary plus commission, benefits, a real chance to move up. He'd been at Crown Luxury for 6 months. He'd kept his head down, done his job. Watched Melissa and Daniel close the big deals while he handled the smaller clients, the ones looking at certified pre-owned, the ones who needed financing, the ones who came in nervous about whether they could afford anything at all. Brandon was good with those clients, patient with them. His numbers weren't as high as Melissa's or Daniel's, but his customer satisfaction scores were the highest on the floor. Not that anyone paid attention to that. Brandon sat on his bed holding the note, staring at the photo of his mother on the wall. Do the thing that costs something. He thought about today. About James Martinez standing there in his wet pants, water pooling around his shoes, asking calmly to speak with the manager. About the little girl Ashley looking confused and hurt and scared. About Melissa's laugh. About Daniel's laugh. About how easy it would have been to join in. About how he hadn't. He thought about delivering this note to Robert Walker tomorrow morning. About what would happen when Walker read it. About what would happen to Melissa, to Daniel, maybe to everyone on the floor. He could warn them. He could call Melissa tonight, tell her what was in the envelope, give her time to prepare. Maybe she could apologize. Maybe they could fix this before James Martinez showed up tomorrow with his legal team. Brandon looked at his phone. Melissa's number was in his contacts. He could call right now. His hand hovered over the phone. Then he thought about Ashley Martinez, 9 years old, standing in that showroom, watching her father get humiliated. And Brandon thought about his own mother, about Terry docking his pay for funeral hours, about every person who'd ever treated him like he didn't matter because he didn't look important enough, rich enough, connected enough. He set his phone down. They made their choices. I'm making mine. Brandon folded the note carefully, put it back in the envelope with the business card, and set both on his nightstand. Then he lay down on his bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. He didn't sleep, not for a long time. His mind kept replaying the afternoon, kept imagining tomorrow, kept wondering what James Martinez was going to do when he walked back into Crown Luxury Motors. At 3:47 a.m., Brandon finally fell asleep. At 6:15 a.m. his alarm went off. He got up, showered, put on his best suit, the charcoal gray one he'd bought for his mother's funeral, and had worn exactly twice since then. At 7:45 a.m. he got in his car, a 2011 Toyota Corolla with 147,000 miles, and drove to Crown Luxury Motors. The parking lot was empty except for Robert Walker's Mercedes and Gary Torres's pickup truck. And across the street, just barely visible, 4 black SUVs were already parked, engines off, waiting. Brandon saw them. His heart started pounding. Oh God, he's already here. Robert Walker was 54 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from weekend golf at the country club and not from actual outdoor work. He wore his suits the way some men wear armor, carefully selected, precisely fitted, communicating a specific version of themselves before they'd said a single word. He'd been general manager of Crown Luxury Motors for 8 years. In those 8 years, he'd hit targets, won regional awards, built a staff that closed deals efficiently and consistently. He'd learned which rules were absolute and which ones had just enough give to be useful. This morning he'd arrived at 7:30 a.m., early the way he liked it, so the building felt like it belonged to him before anyone else arrived to complicate that feeling. He was unlocking his office door, coffee in hand, when he heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. Walker." Robert turned. Brandon Flores stood in the hallway wearing a suit Robert had seen before, but somehow looked different today. More serious, more purposeful. "Brandon, you're early." "Yes, sir. I need to speak with you before the floor opens." Robert looked at him more carefully. There was something in Brandon's expression, not fear exactly, but gravity, the look of someone carrying something heavy. "All right." He unlocked his office, gestured Brandon inside. "What's this about?" Brandon reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He held it out. "A man came in yesterday. He asked me to give you this. He said to give it to you before 9 a.m. Robert took the envelope, looked at it. 4 words written on the front in neat block letters. "Open this alone tonight. What man?" He came in around 2 p.m. White shirt, khakis. He was with his daughter. There was an incident with Ms. Rodriguez. Robert's attention sharpened. What kind of incident? Brandon chose his next words very carefully. "I think you should read what's in the envelope before the floor opens, sir." Something in Brandon's voice, something Robert couldn't quite identify, made him set down his coffee and actually look at the younger man. "An incident with Melissa." "Yes, sir." "Serious?" "Yes, sir." Robert studied him for a moment. Then he broke the seal on the envelope. The first thing Robert pulled out was a business card. Cream-colored, expensive paper. He read it once, and something cold moved through his chest. James Martinez, CEO and founder. Hayes Automotive Group. Owner, Crown Luxury Motors. Portland Houston Premium Auto. Dallas Executive Imports. Robert's thumb pressed against the edge of the card. Hard. "When did you say this man came in?" His voice was steady, professional, but Brandon could hear the shift underneath it, the sound of a man who had just realized something very bad was happening. "Around 2 p.m. yesterday, sir." Robert looked at the card again. "Read the name. Read the title. Read the words, Owner Crown Luxury Motors Portland." 8 months ago, Hayes Automotive Group had purchased Crown Luxury through a quiet acquisition. Robert had been told the new owner preferred to remain hands-off, that regional management would handle operations, that nothing would change day to day. He'd never met James Martinez, had never seen a photo, had assumed like everyone else that Martinez was some faceless corporate entity in Texas who would never actually set foot in Portland. Robert pulled out the second item. Handwritten. 6 lines. Blue ink. "Mr. Walker, I am James Martinez, owner of this dealership. I purchased Crown Luxury 8 months ago. Yesterday I walked in as a customer with my daughter to observe how my employees treat walk-in clients. Your senior sales executive threw water at me in front of my 9-year-old child. Your staff laughed. You were in your office and did not respond to 3 requests to see the manager. I will return this morning at 10 o'clock with my legal team. I suggest you review security footage from 2:10 p.m. to 3:50 p.m. before I arrive. James Martinez." Robert read it once, read it again. His jaw tightened. She threw water at him. It wasn't a question. Brandon nodded. "Yes, sir." At his feet, glass shattered. His daughter was standing right there. And the staff laughed. "Some of them, sir." "Yes." Robert set the note down on his desk very carefully, like it might explode if handled roughly. He looked up at Brandon. "And you're the one who gave him your attention." "He approached me, sir. After everything else. He asked me to deliver this to you when I had a moment alone with you." Robert was silent for a long moment. He looked at the business card, the note, the 4 words on the envelope. Then he looked at Brandon with an expression Brandon couldn't quite categorize, something between respect and resignation. "Thank you, Brandon. I'll handle it from here." Brandon nodded, turned to leave. "Brandon." He stopped at the door. "The incident you mentioned. Melissa throwing water? What specifically happened?" Brandon turned back. He'd thought about this moment, about what he would say, about whether there was a version of the truth that was partial enough to be comfortable. He'd decided there wasn't. She poured a glass of water, walked past him and his daughter, tilted the glass. Water hit his shoes and pants. The glass fell and broke on the floor. The little girl jumped back, scared. And Ms. Rodriguez said, "Oops." Brandon paused. Then she said, "Clumsy me." Robert said nothing. "He asked to speak with you 3 times, sir. He was told you were unavailable." Still nothing. He was the only customer in the waiting area. He'd been there for 45 minutes. Robert's face was very still. "Thank you, Brandon. That will be all." Brandon left. Robert sat alone in his office. He looked at the security camera feed on his computer, opened the footage from yesterday, 2:10 p.m. He watched for 97 minutes straight. He watched James Martinez and Ashley Martinez walk in, watched Gary Torres block them, watched Melissa approach with that particular energy. Robert recognized the energy of someone who had already decided this wasn't worth their time. He watched them sit in the waiting area, watched 45 minutes pass with no one approaching them. He watched Melissa stand up, pour water, walk past James and Ashley. He watched the water splash, the glass shatter. Ashley jump back. He watched Melissa say something. The audio didn't pick it up, but her mouth clearly formed the words, "Oops, clumsy me." He watched Daniel and Gwen laugh, watched Nicole Davis smile. He watched James Martinez, soaking wet, stand up and calmly ask to speak with the manager. Robert paused the video on that frame. James Martinez standing there patient and steady and completely in control, while around him a room full of Robert's employees treated him like he was nothing. The owner of this dealership. I let them throw water on the owner of this dealership in front of his 9-year-old daughter. He looked at his watch. 8:17 a.m. He had 1 hour and 43 minutes before James Martinez walked back through those doors with his legal team. Robert picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Rebecca Anderson, his assistant, who had been with Crown Luxury since it opened, and who knew more about how the place actually ran than anyone. "Rebecca, I need you to come in early. Now, we have a situation." The second call was to his lawyer. "Tom, it's Robert Walker. I need advice. Fast. And it's not good." At 9 a.m., Crown Luxury Motors opened its doors for the day. Melissa Rodriguez arrived at 9:17, parking her BMW in her designated spot, walking through the employee entrance with her usual confidence. She was in a good mood. Her commission from last week's deal had hit her account this morning. $8,400. Not her biggest, but respectable. She dropped her bag at her desk, pulled out her phone to check her client schedule, and immediately noticed Daniel and Gwen rolling his chair toward her. "Morning. Coffee, please." Melissa didn't look up from her phone. "I have the Simmons appointment at 11. They're looking at the Bentley Continental." "Nice. Hey, did you hear about the walk-in yesterday?" Melissa looked up. "Which walk-in?" Daniel grinned. "The one in the white shirt. Walmart guy. Brandon said he gave an envelope to Walker." Melissa smiled, the particular smile of someone who has already decided this is amusing rather than concerning. Probably a complaint letter. "Dear sir, your staff was mean to me. Please send $20 gift card." Daniel laughed. "Or a prayer card. Jesus still loves you even though you're terrible at customer service." Nicole Davis, the younger associate, walked past and heard them. She smiled uncertainly but didn't join the conversation. Something about yesterday still sat wrong with her, the way that little girl had looked when the glass shattered, the way her father had stayed so calm when anyone else would have been furious. But Nicole didn't say anything. She was 26, had been at Crown Luxury for 6 months, same as Brandon, and she'd learned quickly that Daniel and Melissa set the tone on the floor. If they thought something was funny, it was safer to smile along than to question it. Brandon sat at his desk near the east wall, pretending to review his client list while actually watching the clock. 9:17, 9:28, 9:45. Melissa and Daniel were laughing about something. Nicole was organizing brochures. Gary Torres was at his position by the door. Everything looked normal. They have no idea. They have absolutely no idea what's about to walk through that door. Part of him, a small part, but it was there, wanted to warn them, wanted to walk over to Melissa's desk and say, "The man you threw water on yesterday, he owns this place, and he's coming back in 45 minutes with lawyers." But Brandon didn't move. He thought about Ashley Martinez, about her confused, hurt face, about how she'd apologized to her father for wanting to see a car. They made their choices. At 9:53 a.m., Rebecca Anderson. Robert Walker's assistant, 48 years old, who had worked at Crown Luxury since the day it opened, and who Brandon privately believed knew more about running the dealership than Walker did, walked out of the back offices. Her face was carefully neutral, but Brandon had worked with her long enough to read the signs. The way she walked a little faster than usual. The way her mouth was pressed into a thin line. The way she glanced at Melissa's desk as she passed. Rebecca walked directly to Robert's office, knocked once, entered without waiting for a response. Brandon couldn't hear what they said, but through the glass walls of Robert's office he saw Robert stand up, saw him straighten his tie, saw him walk to the large front windows of the showroom and look out at the street. Brandon turned his head and looked at the street too. 4 black SUVs were parked along the curb, not parked the way customers parked loosely at angles, one wheel sometimes on the curb. These were parked the way a military convoy parks, pulled tight to the line, evenly spaced, parallel with geometric precision. The windows were tinted, the engines were off. They were simply there, like a statement waiting to be read. Brandon's heart started pounding. Here we go. At exactly 10 a.m., the doors of all 4 SUVs opened simultaneously, not one at a time, all at once. With the coordinated timing of something that had been rehearsed, or more accurately of something done by people who were used to doing things together and didn't need to rehearse because the order of operations was simply understood. From the first vehicle, 2 men in dark suits, attorneys clearly. One of them carried a slim leather portfolio. From the second and third vehicles, corporate executives, 4 of them total. They wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and they moved with the particular confidence of people who walked into rooms and had other people adjust accordingly. From the fourth vehicle, last moving with the same unhurried patience he'd shown yesterday afternoon, James Martinez. James was different today. The white shirt was gone. The khakis were gone. The scuffed brown shoes were gone. He wore a charcoal gray suit, Brooks Brothers well cut but not flashy, the kind of suit that communicated serious professional competence without trying to impress. His shoes were clean leather Oxfords, still modest but appropriate. His shirt was crisp white, no longer old, but his hands, the hands resting at his sides as he walked toward the entrance, those were the same. Still calloused at the base of the fingers, still marked with the faint shadows of oil that never quite washed out. James Martinez had dressed like a CEO, but his hands still remembered being a mechanic. Brandon noticed immediately Ashley wasn't there. James had come alone, well, not alone, but without his daughter. He left her at home. He didn't want her to see this. Gary Torres stood at his position by the door. He'd been briefed. Rebecca had pulled him aside at 9:45 and told him in very clear terms that when the SUVs arrived, he was to open the door immediately and step aside. Gary had asked why. Rebecca had said, "Because the man in the fourth vehicle owns this building and everyone in it, and if you make him ask twice to enter his own dealership, you won't have a job by lunch." So when James Martinez approached the door, Gary opened it before James reached it, stepped aside, gave a nod that was respectful, professional, nothing like yesterday's challenge. James nodded back once, then walked inside. The effect was immediate. Melissa looked up from her computer, saw James. Her brain took a second to process man from yesterday, and then her eyes tracked to the men filing in behind him. The suits, the attorneys, the briefcases, the way they arranged themselves around the entrance like a legal argument that had already been won. Her face went through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. Recognition, confusion, and then something colder. Dread. Daniel Nguyen's mouth opened. No sound came out. Nicole Davis looked from James to Melissa to Brandon, trying to understand what was happening. The other staff, 2 more sales associates, the receptionist, a detailer who'd come inside to grab keys, all stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. Robert came out of his office. He'd prepared for this moment, had rehearsed what he would say. But seeing James Martinez actually standing there in his showroom surrounded by attorneys made all those rehearsed words evaporate. "Mr. Martinez." "I want to begin by saying, Mr. Walker," James interrupted, not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly, "thank you for being available." The room was absolutely silent. For the next 10 minutes, everyone in that showroom, salespeople who had laughed, managers who had ignored, security guards who had blocked, would learn that every decision you make, every person you dismiss, every customer you let your staff humiliate, it all comes back. Always. James walked to the center of the showroom floor, stopped, looked around at the assembled staff with that same patient inventorying look Brandon remembered from yesterday. I want to begin by giving everyone context. He turned slowly, making eye contact with different people as he spoke. My name is James Martinez. Some of you may have seen me yesterday. I was here with my 9-year-old daughter Ashley. We walked in around 2 p.m. We wanted to see the GT Serpente, the blue hypercar on that platform. He gestured toward the raised platform where the Serpente sat midnight blue and perfect. My daughter loves that car. She wants to be a marine biologist someday, and she said the color reminds her of the deep ocean. So I brought her here to see it. Pause. The room waited. I didn't announce myself when I walked in. I didn't call ahead. I didn't send an assistant to arrange a private viewing. I walked in the way any customer should be able to walk into any business. His voice remained steady, calm, but there was something underneath it now. Wait. I walked in the way any customer should be able to walk into any business that I own. Audible gasps. Melissa's face went white. I am the owner of Crown Luxury Motors. I purchased this dealership 8 months ago through Hayes Automotive Group. I also own Houston Premium Auto in Texas and Dallas Executive Imports. This is my 3rd dealership. Daniel looked like he'd been punched. I've done this at all 3 of my locations. I disguise myself as a walk-in customer. I dress modestly. I don't make appointments. I watch how my staff treats people who don't look wealthy, people who don't look important. He looked directly at Melissa. Because I used to be that person. I was a mechanic for 10 years. I worked with my hands. I wore work clothes. And I was treated more times than I can count, like I didn't matter by salespeople who looked at my clothes and decided I wasn't worth their time. At my Houston location, I fired a general manager for this exact behavior. At my Dallas location, I demoted 3 sales associates and issued formal warnings to 5 more. I hoped Crown Luxury, with its reputation, with its premium brand, would be different. His jaw tightened slightly. Instead, I watched my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, watch her father get water thrown at his feet by a senior sales executive. He looked at Melissa, held her gaze. Ms. Rodriguez, I reviewed the security footage this morning, all 97 minutes of it. You didn't accidentally spill that water. You tilted the glass deliberately. And when it shattered on the floor and scared my daughter, you smiled and said, "Clumsy me." Melissa tried to speak. Mr. Martinez, that was, do not. James's voice was quiet but absolute. Do not insult both of us by trying to explain it away. Melissa's mouth closed. One of the attorneys, Christopher Allen James's personal counsel and COO, opened the leather portfolio and slid a stack of documents onto the nearest display table. Mr. Walker, Ms. Rodriguez, you are receiving formal notice effective immediately. James turned to Robert. Mr. Walker, you were in your office during all of this. I asked 3 times to speak with the manager. 3 times your staff told me you were in a meeting. Robert opened his mouth to respond, but James continued. There was no meeting. You were reviewing quarterly reports. I checked the security footage. You were alone in your office, door closed, while on your floor a customer, the owner of this company, was being humiliated. James's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. You are being reassigned effective today. You will transfer to our service center in East Portland. You'll manage the intake desk. Your compensation will be adjusted to reflect the new role. Robert Walker, General Manager of Crown Luxury Motors for 8 years, Regional Award winner. The man who had built this staff and these numbers said nothing. He was a man who knew when a door had closed. Ms. Rodriguez, James continued, turning to her, you are placed on formal probation. 6 months. You will complete mandatory customer service training 40 hours starting next week. Your commission structure is adjusted. Any further conduct violations will result in immediate termination. Melissa's face had gone from white to gray. She was operating on autopilot now, the way people do when their brain has run out of emotional bandwidth and is just trying to process instructions. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Her voice was barely audible. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was so complete you could hear the hum of the LED lights overhead. James let the silence sit for a moment. Let it press down on everyone. Let them feel the weight of their choices. Brandon Flores. Brandon, who had been standing near the edge of the group trying to take up as little space as possible, looked up. His throat was tight. "Yes, sir. Thank you for delivering that envelope." "Yes, sir." James walked toward him. Not quickly, just steadily. The way he did everything. "How long have you been in sales, Brandon?" 6 months here, sir." 3 years before that at Eastside Auto. And before that, Brandon swallowed. Portland Community College. Business Management Program. "I dropped out in my 2nd year. My mother got sick. I needed to work." Something shifted in James's expression. Not pity. Recognition. "You didn't laugh yesterday." "No, sir. I didn't think it was funny." "No, it wasn't." Christopher Allen stepped forward again, pulled another document from the portfolio, held it out toward Brandon. "Brandon, starting Monday, you will assume the role of Assistant General Manager of Crown Luxury Motors. You'll have full operational authority over the floor staff, scheduling, and client relations. You'll report directly to me." Brandon stared at the document. Didn't take it at first. Just stared. "Sir." His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Sir, I don't have a degree. I don't have management experience. There are people here who have been in sales for years. I've been here 6 months." Daniel Nguyen's face was a mask of shock and anger. 6 months. I've been here 4 years and this kid gets promoted over me. I'm aware of what you have and don't have, Brandon. You have 6 months at this location and 3 years before that. You also have something that cannot be taught, cannot be bought, and cannot be assessed in any performance review I've ever read. He paused. You have the ability to watch someone be humiliated and decide not to participate. You have the integrity to deliver an envelope that you knew would end careers, including possibly your own, because it was the right thing to do. James looked at him steadily. That is the only qualification I require for this role. Everything else is learnable. Brandon took the document with shaking hands. Read it. Assistant General Manager, Crown Luxury Motors. Salary $87,000 per year. Benefits full medical dental vision, 401k match. Start date, Monday, October 31st. Brandon looked up from the paper. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying, just overwhelmed. Sir, I won't let you down. I know. James turned back to the assembled group. The rest of you have the opportunity to continue working here. That opportunity is conditional on how you do your jobs going forward, not your numbers, not your commissions, how you treat people. He let that land. Mr. Flores will be the standard by which this floor is measured. I suggest you pay attention to how he operates. James turned toward the exit. His legal team and executives began to follow documents secured business concluded. At the door, James stopped, turned back, looked at the GT Serpente on its raised platform, midnight blue paint catching the morning light, looking exactly like the deep ocean. One more thing. Robert, still standing shell-shocked near his former office, looked up. I'm purchasing the Serpente. Full price, no negotiation. Have the paperwork prepared by end of day. Robert nodded automatically. Yes, sir. When would you like delivery arranged? James smiled. The first genuine smile since he'd walked in. Deliver it to Riverside Elementary School on October 28th, 2:30 p.m. My daughter's birthday. She's in Mrs. Patterson's 4th grade class. Everyone was listening now. I want her to sit in it during recess, in front of all her friends. I want her to know that when someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere, when someone makes you feel small, when someone decides you're not worth their time, you remember who you are. You remember your worth doesn't come from what other people think. He paused. And Ms. Rodriguez, James said, looking directly at Melissa. You will be the one to deliver it. You will drive it to the school. You will open the door for my daughter, and you will tell her it's a gift from her father. Melissa's face went absolutely white. Sir, You will be polite, you will be kind, and you will apologize to Ashley for making her wait yesterday, for scaring her, for making her watch her father be treated with disrespect. James's voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was steel underneath it. This is not a request. This is a condition of your continued employment. Do you understand?" Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." "Good." James pushed open the door. His team followed. They walked to the SUVs in the same formation they'd arrived in, precise, coordinated, professional. James got into the fourth vehicle. One by one, the doors closed. One by one, the engines started. The convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving Crown Luxury Motors in their wake. For 30 seconds, no one in the showroom moved. Then Melissa walked to her desk like someone in a dream. She sat down. She didn't open her computer. She didn't pick up her phone. She just sat there staring at the surface of her desk. Daniel stood frozen near the import section, his mind trying to process how the kid with 6 months' experience was now his boss. Nicole looked at Brandon with something like awe. Gary Torres, still by the door, caught Brandon's eye and gave him the full nod. The kind that means you did the right thing and I respect it. And Brandon Flores stood in the middle of the showroom floor, holding a piece of paper that said, "Assistant General Manager," and tried to remember how to breathe. 1 week later, the East Portland Service Center was nothing like Crown Luxury Motors. No Italian marble, no chandeliers, no precision LED lighting making cars look like liquid art. 8 bays with hydraulic lifts, a small customer waiting area with plastic chairs and a coffee maker that had seen better days, oil stains on the concrete floor, and the smell of brake cleaner and exhaust. And at the intake desk, wearing a polo shirt with the Hayes Automotive logo on it, instead of his usual suit, sat Robert Walker. "Sir, how long will it take?" The customer in front of him was in her 60s, worried, wringing her hands. "I need my car to get to work. I work the night shift at the hospital." Robert looked at the work order. "Transmission repair. Not cheap. The repair will take about 3 days. But let me talk to our service manager. We might be able to get you a loaner vehicle while we work on yours, free of charge." The woman's face brightened. "Really? You can do that? Let me check. Give me just a moment." He walked to the back, found Timothy Moore, the service center manager, a man in his 50s who'd been a technician for 30 years before moving into management and who ran the center with quiet competence. "Tim, customer at the desk, needs her car for work. Night shift nurse. Transmission repair 3 days minimum. We have any loaners available?" Timothy checked the log. "We've got a 2019 Civic. Nothing fancy, but it runs." "Perfect. Let's get her into it." Timothy looked at Robert with mild surprise. "You know that's not standard policy for service center loaners, right? Those are usually reserved for—" "I know, but she needs it. And we can do it, so let's do it." Timothy smiled slightly. "All right, you're the manager." Robert walked back to the intake desk. "Good news. We have a loaner for you. 2019 Honda Civic. You can drive it until your car is ready." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't know what I was going to do." "It's no problem." And he meant it. That night, driving home in his Mercedes, which felt absurd now driving a $90,000 car from a job that paid half what he used to make, Robert thought about the nurse. He thought about how her car breaking down was a real problem. How 3 days without transportation could mean missed shifts, lost pay, maybe even lost employment. He thought about how at Crown Luxury he'd spent 8 years selling cars to people for whom cars were toys, status symbols, recreational purchases. People who could afford to have their car in the shop for 3 weeks and not think twice because they had 2 others in the garage. And he thought about how in 1 week at the service center he'd helped more people with real problems than he had in the last year at Crown Luxury. "You know what I missed? I thought I'd missed the level, the prestige. I did for a while. But what I actually missed is feeling like I was useful." At Riverside Elementary School on October 28th at 2:15 p.m., the GT Serpentine rolled slowly down Northeast 52nd Avenue. Melissa Rodriguez was driving her hands at 10 and 2, hyper-aware of every control, every mirror, every pedestrian and bicycle within a 3-block radius. She'd driven expensive cars before, that was literally her job, but she'd never driven a $2.4 million hypercar to a grade school to deliver it to a 9-year-old as a birthday present while apologizing for humiliating her father. There's a first time for everything. The school principal, Mrs. Linda Brown, had been briefed by James Martinez directly. She'd arranged for the fence gate to be opened for the recess period to be extended by 15 minutes for Mrs. Jennifer Patterson's fourth-grade class to be brought outside early. When the Serpenti pulled up to the curb, midnight blue paint, reflecting the afternoon sun, engine purring with barely restrained power, 200 children stopped playing and turned to stare. "Oh my gosh, is that a real car? It looks like it's from a movie." Mrs. Patterson brought Ashley Martinez to the fence. Ashley was wearing jeans, a blue t-shirt with a sea turtle on it, and sneakers with Velcro straps. She was also wearing the biggest, most uncertain smile Melissa had ever seen. "Ashley, someone's here for you." Ashley saw the car. Her eyes went wide. "Daddy!" She called out, thinking James was inside. Melissa stepped out of the driver's side. She was wearing a professional blazer, modest jewelry, her hair pulled back simply. She'd thought very carefully about what to wear today, what was appropriate for apologizing to a 9-year-old. "Hi, Ashley. I'm Melissa. Your dad asked me to bring this car for your birthday." Ashley's smile faltered slightly. You're the lady from the store." Melissa's heart clenched. She remembers. Of course she remembers. "Yes, I am." Ashley looked at the car, then back at Melissa, then at the car again. Confused, excited, uncertain. "Is Daddy here?" "He's at work. But he wanted me to tell you happy birthday, and he wanted you to sit in the car, in front of all your friends." Melissa took a breath. This was the part James had specifically instructed her to do. This was the part that mattered more than the car, more than the delivery, more than anything. "Ashley, I need to tell you something first. When you and your dad came to see this car, I wasn't kind to him. I made you wait a long time. And I did something that scared you, with the water in the glass." Ashley nodded slowly. "I saw through the window." "You did?" "I was in the car. I saw the glass break. I saw Daddy get wet." Melissa felt something crack in her chest. "Ashley, I'm so sorry. What I did was wrong. Your dad didn't deserve that, and you didn't deserve to see it." Ashley looked at her seriously. 9 years old, but in that moment she looked older, wiser. "My mom used to say that sorry is just a word. You have to do the change too." Melissa felt tears prick her eyes. "Your mom was very smart. She left when I was little. But Daddy says she was right about that. She was. And I'm working on the change, Ashley. I promise." Ashley studied her for a long moment. Then, "Okay." Mrs. Patterson opened the gate. Ashley walked through, approached the Serpenti like it was something sacred. Melissa opened the driver's door, not the passenger door, the driver's door, because James had specifically said Ashley should sit where the driver sits. "Can I really sit in it? Your dad bought it for you. It's yours." Ashley climbed in. Her feet didn't quite reach the pedals. She put her hands on the steering wheel, a steering wheel that cost more than most people's cars, and her face lit up with pure, uncomplicated joy. It really is like the ocean. All 200 kids were pressed against the fence now, watching amazed. Ashley's classmates were shouting, "That's your car! Can I sit in it?" "Ashley, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen." Mrs. Patterson was taking photos on her phone, smiling. A pickup truck pulled up behind the Serpenti. James Martinez got out wearing work clothes, a Hayes Automotive polo jeans boots. He'd come straight from the service center where he'd been meeting with Timothy Moore about equipment upgrades. Daddy, Ashley shrieked from the driver's seat. James walked to the car, leaned in through the open door. "Happy birthday, Ashley Bug. Daddy, it's perfect. It's exactly like the ocean, like the Mariana Trench. You like it." "Can we keep it?" James laughed. "We can keep it. Can we drive to the real ocean?" "Absolutely. This weekend. You, me, and the Serpenti. We'll drive to Cannon Beach." Ashley threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Melissa stood to the side watching this father-daughter moment and felt the full weight of what she'd almost destroyed. She'd almost ruined this joy, this trust, this relationship between a father who had worked his entire life to be able to give his daughter something beautiful and a daughter who deserved to feel like she belonged anywhere she wanted to be. I let the room tell me it was funny, but it wasn't funny. It had never been funny. It was cruel. And cruelty, Melissa was learning, had a cost. After Ashley had climbed out of the car and run to show her friends, James walked over to where Melissa stood. "Thank you for doing this." Melissa looked at him. "Mr. Martinez, I know. Brandon told me you've been different since the probation started, that you've changed how you approach customers." Melissa nodded. "I'm trying. That's all I can ask. And then because it mattered, the fact that you're trying tells me this wasn't a waste. The probation, the training, all of it, it tells me you're capable of learning." Melissa's throat was tight. "I won't let you down, sir." "Good." He looked at Ashley, still surrounded by friends, still glowing. "Because she deserves to live in a world where people are kinder than we were that day." "Yes, sir, she does." 6 weeks as assistant general manager taught Brandon Flores that leadership was less about knowing all the answers and more about knowing which questions to ask at 2 a.m. when you couldn't sleep. He arrived at Crown Luxury Motors every morning at 6:45, left every night at 8, sometimes later, worked through lunch most days, eating a sandwich at his desk while reviewing inventory reports, staffing schedules, regional communications, customer feedback surveys that came back with comments like, "Brandon really listened," and "felt valued for the first time." The exhaustion was real. The fulfillment was realer. The hardest lesson came in week 4, delivered by Daniel Nguyen in the form of strategic lateness. 6 minutes past the Monday morning briefing start time. The third occurrence in 3 weeks, just inside the margin of plausible traffic, just outside the boundary of acceptable. Daniel took his seat without apology, without acknowledgement, with the particular energy of someone testing whether new management would notice patterns or just react to individual incidents. Brandon noticed. He finished the briefing, Q4 projections, new inventory allocation, customer service metrics, and as the team filed out, he kept his voice level. "Daniel, stay after this, please." "Sure thing." When the door closed, Brandon didn't sit behind the desk. Leaned against the edge instead, arms loosely crossed, not trying to perform authority, just present. "Tell me what's going on." "Nothing's going on. You've been 6 minutes late 3 times in 3 weeks. You held a client conversation at the East Wall last Tuesday when I'd already moved that client to Nicole's rotation. And in every team meeting you let everyone else respond before you do, and then you say the minimum." Brandon looked at him steadily. "Something's going on." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Then, you want me to be honest? That's what I just asked for. I've been here 4 years. I've closed more volume than anyone on this floor this quarter. I've closed more than you have in your 6 months combined." He wasn't hostile about it. He was stating it the way someone states something they've been carrying around and are finally putting down. "And you walk in here, good guy. I'm not saying you're not a good guy, but you walk in here with 1 day's notice and a piece of paper that says you're my boss and I'm supposed to just—" He stopped, spread his hands. "What am I supposed to do with that?" Brandon was quiet for a moment. He'd thought about this conversation, knew it was coming, knew Daniel's resentment was legitimate. "You're supposed to do exactly what you're doing. You're supposed to be frustrated." "That's fair. It is fair." Daniel looked surprised. "But here's the thing, Daniel. I didn't ask for this job. I didn't campaign for it or step over you to get it. A man handed it to me because I did one thing right in a moment when it would have been easy to do the wrong thing. That's the whole story." He met Daniel's eyes. "Now, I can't change how it happened. What I can tell you is this. If you close the volume you say you close, I want you closing it. I need you doing every good thing you know how to do on this floor." Brandon paused. "And if there's a decision I make that you think is wrong, tell me. Directly. To my face. I will listen to you every single time. What I can't have is you telegraphing to the rest of the team that the way to handle new management is to slow walk everything and see if they notice." Daniel looked at the floor, then back up. "You noticed. I noticed on day 1. Something shifted in Daniel's face. Not a complete turn. Not the overnight conversion of a skeptic to a believer. Just a small movement. The kind that means I'm listening now in a different way than I was before." "Okay, I hear you." "Good." Brandon straightened up from the desk. 6 minutes late again and I'm writing it up. I don't want to, but I will. Daniel almost smiled. Understood. Go sell something. Daniel went. Brandon stood alone in the office for a moment. It still felt like Robert's office, the arrangement of the furniture, the angle of the desk toward the door, even the faint smell of the cologne Robert had worn every day for 8 years. Brandon had moved nothing yet. Wasn't sure if that was strategy or hesitation. He pulled out his phone, texted the disconnected number that used to be his mother's mom. I just had the hardest conversation of my career. I think I did it right. I wish you could tell me for sure. The message failed to send like always, but it helped anyway. 3 weeks into Brandon's tenure as AGM, James called him. Brandon, I need you to write a pricing proposal. The regional guidelines are too rigid for top-tier vehicles. We're losing clients to Westfield Auto Gallery because they have a legacy discretionary allowance we don't have access to. Okay. Brandon grabbed a pen. 2 pages. What you want, what you'll trade for it, what it means for 6-month volume projections. I need it by Friday. I can have it by Friday. Thursday. James's voice carried the particular weight of a man who had already made the decision before offering the timeline. I fly out Friday morning. Thursday. Brandon spent 2 days on it. Worked through lunch both days. Stayed late both nights. The first 2 pages were straightforward data, competitive analysis, margin projections, volume forecasts. He pulled numbers from the last 18 months, compared Crown Luxury's performance to Westfield's, identified the specific price points where they were losing deals. It was solid work, professional, the kind of proposal any competent AGM could write. But Wednesday night, sitting in his apartment at 11:30 p.m., Brandon stared at what he'd written and thought, this isn't enough. The data was right. The numbers were right. But it was missing something. It was missing the why. Brandon opened a new document, started typing. He wrote about the human reason underneath the numbers, about why a customer standing in front of a $2 million car needs to feel like the price has some movement in it. Why the illusion of negotiation, even a small one, is part of what they're actually selling. Why a dealership that removes that from the conversation might sell the car but loses the client. He wrote from experience. From 3 years at East Side Auto watching people walk out because they felt disrespected. From 6 weeks at Crown Luxury learning that luxury wasn't about the car, it was about how the customer felt when they bought it. He wrote, I spent 3 years watching people get treated like their budget made them less interesting, even when they were buying something real. You can tell when a salesperson has already decided what they think you can afford. You feel it before they've said anything. And then the whole conversation is just both of you pretending the decision hasn't already been made. This pricing flexibility isn't about the discount. It's about showing the customer that we see them as an individual, not a category, that we're willing to meet them where they are, that they matter enough for us to negotiate. The numbers on the previous 2 pages show what this will cost us. But what we get in return is something you can't measure in margin points. We get customers who come back, who tell their friends, who choose us not because we were cheapest, but because we made them feel valued. Brandon finished writing at 1:47 a.m. Read it through 3 times, almost deleted it twice. It's too personal, too informal. James asked for 2 pages, not 3. But then he remembered James hadn't promoted him because he was the most experienced. He'd promoted him because he had something that couldn't be taught. Brandon saved the document. 3 pages. He'd let James decide if the 3rd page was worth reading. At 8:15 a.m. Thursday, Brandon's phone rang. I read it last night, all 3 pages. Brandon's stomach dropped. I know you said 2 pages, sir. I can cut. The 3rd page is the only reason the first 2 pages work. Brandon exhaled. I've been in rooms with MBAs from schools that charge $80,000 a year, people with degrees in finance, marketing, business strategy. None of them have ever written me a 3rd page like that. Pause. Where did that come from? Brandon thought about his mother, about East Side Auto, about watching Ashley Martinez apologize for wanting to see a car. From standing on the wrong side of the desk, sir? Yeah. There was something in James's voice, recognition maybe, respect. The pricing allowance is approved, retroactive to the 1st of the month. You'll get confirmation from regional by end of day. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Write the Q4 plan using it and make the numbers say something worth reading. Then James's voice shifted slightly, not warmer exactly, but more present. The way a person's voice changes when they've moved from the professional track to the personal one without fully announcing it. Brandon, I'd like you to come to the corporate office next Tuesday. Lunch. Just us. Brandon frowned. Is there something specific on the agenda? No agenda. Lunch. And before Brandon could ask anything else, tell Gary I said good morning. He hung up. The Hayes Automotive Group offices were on the 42nd floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. Brandon had looked up the building the night before. Glass and steel, built in 2019, LEED-certified premium office space, renting at $45 per square foot. He wore his best suit, the charcoal gray he'd bought for his mother's funeral. It still fit. He'd kept it clean. The receptionist on 42 sent him through with a smile and a visitor badge. A young woman named Catherine Hill walked him down a hallway lined with photos, dealerships, awards, charity events, to a corner conference room. James was already there. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, standing at the window looking out at the city. He turned when Brandon entered. You found it, GPS. 22 years living in this city, and I still needed GPS. James smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. Sit. Eat something. You look like you've been working through lunch for a month. 6 weeks. That's not eating. That's refueling while moving. The food was good, actual lunch catered from somewhere downtown, not styrofoam plates and plastic wrap. They talked about the floor, about Daniel coming around, about Melissa's transformation. She's different. I don't know if it'll hold long term, but right now she's different in a way that feels real. She stopped sorting people in the first 30 seconds. Actually listens now. James nodded. People can change when they're given a reason to. She needed to see what she looked like from the outside. The security footage did that. They talked about Robert at the service center. I called him last week just to check in. James looked at him. You didn't have to do that. I know. But it felt right. How's he doing? He said he's learning what useful feels like again. James was quiet for a moment. Then, you called him, even though he'd been distant to you, even though he'd let an environment exist where you watched a customer get humiliated. He's still a person. People make mistakes. They talked about Brandon's mother, about the strokes, about dropping out of school, about working at East Side Auto and being docked pay for funeral hours. James talked about Ashley's mother leaving, about the years he'd spent building the business and missing Ashley's childhood, about the guilt that came with success. She asks about her mother sometimes, less now than she used to. She mostly asks about the ocean. Brandon smiled. The ocean again. Always the ocean. She wants to be a marine biologist or a race car driver. She hasn't decided. She's got time. She does. And his voice, when he said it, had that particular softness of a parent confirming something they need to confirm regularly. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The kind of silence two people can sit in when they've said enough things out loud that the quiet doesn't have to carry the whole weight. Then James set down his fork, folded his hands on the table. The posture of it shifted the room slightly, not back to formal, but to purposeful. Brandon, I told you at the dealership that I was preparing to retire. I remember. What I didn't tell you is what that means for what comes next. He looked at Brandon carefully. You know about the Hayes Foundation? Brandon nodded. Youth education, workforce development programs, 11 cities across the country. You've been funding it quietly for 9 years. The foundation has a director, Pamela Scott. She's been running it since it started. She's built something I'm incredibly proud of. More proud of than the business. More than the revenue or the dealerships or any of it. Pause. She's retiring with me. The role is open. Brandon felt his chest tighten. I'm asking if you'd consider it. This is not a directive. This is not the envelope. This is one person asking another person a serious question across a lunch table. He leaned forward slightly. The director manages a $48 million annual budget across 11 cities, oversees program directors in each location, handles relationships with school systems, workforce agencies, government offices, represents the foundation publicly when necessary. James paused. It's harder than running a car dealership, in a completely different way. In that moment, Brandon understood something his mother had tried to teach him for years. The hardest decisions aren't between good and bad, they're between good and better, between what you've earned and what you're being called to do. Why me? I've been an assistant general manager for 6 weeks. I've never managed a nonprofit. I've never worked in education or workforce development. Why, James sat back, looked at him with that same patient observation Brandon had seen on the showroom floor. When Pamela was hired 9 years ago, she'd been a high school guidance counselor for 6 years. Before that, she'd worked at a copy shop for 3 years while getting her degree at night. Her qualification wasn't her resume. James met Brandon's eyes. Her qualification was a particular way of looking at people, seeing what they're capable of instead of what they've already done. He paused. You called Robert Walker. Brandon blinked. We talked about that. We did. But I've been thinking about it since. You didn't have to call him. You didn't have anything to gain. He'd been unpleasant to you in the passive way managers are unpleasant to junior staff they don't consider important. He'd allowed an environment where you watched a customer get humiliated. James's voice was level, not rehearsed. And you called him at the service center to check on him. He looked at Brandon steadily. That is what I'm looking for. Not in a car dealership. In a foundation that spends $48 million a year trying to give people a different kind of future than the one they're currently pointed at. I need to think about it. I'd be concerned if you didn't. How long do you need? 2 weeks. Take 3 if you need them. Brandon nodded. Then, what does it pay? James told him. $135,000 per year plus full benefits. Brandon set his fork down. Yeah, I'll take the 3 weeks. The afternoon after the lunch meeting, Brandon sat at his desk and tried to focus on the week's inventory reports. Couldn't. His mind kept circling back to the conversation. $135,000 per year. $48 million budget. 11 cities. Workforce development. Education programs. Giving people different futures. It was overwhelming. It was also the most important thing anyone had ever asked him to do. At 4 p.m., Brandon had an appointment he'd scheduled 2 weeks ago. Paul and Linda Henderson, a couple in their late 60s who'd been looking at the Grand Tourer for 3 months. They walked in at 3:57 p.m. exactly on time. Paul wore khakis and a plaid shirt. Linda wore a simple dress and comfortable shoes. They looked like people who'd worked hard their entire lives and were now considering something they'd promised themselves for 30 years. Brandon met them in the East Lounge, the one with the comfortable chairs and the good lighting. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, thanks for coming in. Please sit. They sat. Brandon sat across from them, and instead of starting with, what's your budget or what's your timeline or what brings you in today, all the questions he'd been trained to ask Brandon said, tell me what you've been thinking about. They talked for 40 minutes. Paul talked about the car he'd seen in a magazine in 1987, about being 28 years old working double shifts at a manufacturing plant keeping that magazine picture in his locker because it reminded him that someday, maybe if he worked hard enough. Linda talked about the trip they were planning, Maine to Seattle and back through the South, visiting their daughter in Boise, seeing their son get married in Austin, making this purchase feel like the beginning of the next chapter, not the end of any previous one. They talked about their grandchildren, about retiring last year, about Paul's health scare 2 years ago that had reminded them that someday needed to become now. Brandon listened, asked one question per 10 minutes, the ratio his mother had taught him without knowing she was teaching it. At the end, Paul leaned forward. We've been looking at this car for 3 months. We know what we want to pay. The question is, how much flexibility is there on the price? Brandon smiled. Some. Let's talk about what makes sense for both of us. They closed the deal at 6:17 p.m. Fair price both sides. Neither party felt outmaneuvered, just heard. Brandon walked them to the door. Paul shook his hand, firm grip calluses like Brandon's father had had. Thank you, son. You treated us right. It was my pleasure. And he meant it. Linda hugged him. Actually hugged him. "You're going to do great things." Brandon watched them walk to their car, a 1998 Toyota Camry, high mileage, well-maintained, and drive away. Brandon stood at the door after they left, thought about Paul and Linda, about how they'd needed someone to listen first, about how the sale wasn't really about the car, it was about being seen, being valued, being treated like people instead of metrics. He pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, started typing. Foundation. Why? Yes. It's the third page. He stared at that line, understood what he meant by it. The dealership was good work, important work. But if the foundation was the third page, if it was the reason underneath everything else, then not considering it seriously was like handing in a proposal without the part that made it worth reading. He typed, "The Hendersons needed someone to listen first." Imagine a whole foundation built on that. And then Mom would say, "Do the thing that costs something. The cheap things never last." He looked at what he'd written, then typed one more line. "Call James Monday. Tell him yes." Brandon sat at his kitchen table Monday morning, coffee gone cold in his mug, phone in his hand, for 11 minutes before he dialed. James picked up on the second ring. Yes. Just that. One word. Plain. Without decoration. Brief silence on James's end. Then, "Okay. Okay, as in, you heard me?" Or, okay as in, "I'll have the paperwork started today." And there was something in his voice that Brandon had never heard before. Not surprise, but something close to relief. Like a man who had been carrying something carefully for a long time and had just found the right place to set it down. "I want you to meet Pamela before she transitions out. She has 6 weeks left. I'd like you to shadow her for at least 4 of them." "Okay. You'll split your time. Tuesday and Thursday at the foundation offices. The rest of the week at Crown Luxury. We'll name an interim floor manager for the days you're not there." "Daniel Nguyen." Brandon said it without hesitation. Pause. "You sure about that?" "He needs it. He's ready for it, and doesn't know he's ready for it. Which is exactly when people need to be given the thing." Brandon picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, set it down. "He came around Mr. Martinez. He's solid. And if you give him the interim role and he performs, which he will, you've solved 2 problems at once, his and Crown Luxuries. Write that up and send it to Regional. They'll want sign-off. I'll push it through, but they need the paper trail. I'll have it by noon." The Hayes Foundation offices were on the 28th floor of a different building from the corporate headquarters, deliberately separate, which Pamela had insisted on 9 years ago. "This work has to live near the people it serves," she told Brandon on his first visit, standing at the window and pointing at the neighborhoods below. "Not near the people who fund it." Pamela Scott was 61 years old, 5'4", with gray hair she wore in a practical bob and glasses she pushed up her nose every 3 minutes. She had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms where someone needed someone to be the calm thing. She was also, Brandon discovered over the next 4 weeks, one of the smartest, most competent people he'd ever met. Pamela walked him through budget allocations across 11 cities, program assessments and outcome measurements, relationships with city agencies, some good, some contentious, all requiring diplomacy. The particular challenge of operating in communities that had been failed by institutions before and didn't trust easily. How to represent the foundation publicly without making it about ego or credit. How to hire program directors, look for character, teach the skills. How to fire program directors, rare but necessary, when they'd lost sight of the mission. On his 3rd Tuesday, Pamela poured 2 coffees from the break room machine. Did it herself always, because she'd never seen the point of having someone carry your coffee when you had 2 working hands, and sat down across from Brandon at the conference table. "Why do you want this job?" Brandon looked up. "We're 4 weeks in." "I know. I'm asking anyway." Brandon thought about the question honestly. The way Pamela had taught him to think about everything, not for the right answer, but for the true one. "Because I spent 3 years watching people get sorted into categories before anyone found out who they were. And I think that's most people's experience of most institutions. You walk in and someone has already decided what you are before you've opened your mouth. He looked at her. I want to work on the part before the sorting, the part where a person decides what's possible for themselves. That's earlier. That's where the real thing happens. Pamela looked at him for a long moment. Then James told me about the dealership. What part? All of it. The envelope. What you said to the staff after. How you called Robert Walker. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He told me about your mother. Brandon was quiet. I lost my father when I was 24. He didn't know I'd gotten this job. I always wished he could have. She stopped, adjusted. The point I'm making is that the people who gave us the instinct for this work almost never get to see what we do with it. She looked at him steadily. That's one of the harder parts of being in this field. You learn to do the work on their behalf anyway. Brandon looked down at his coffee, thought about his mother, about the disconnected number he still texted sometimes. Yes. Pamela nodded. Now let's talk about the Detroit program director, because she's 3 months into an initiative that's either going to be remarkable or a very instructive failure, and I want to make sure you understand which levers to watch. Brandon called a staff meeting on a Wednesday morning 6 weeks after accepting the foundation role. Everyone gathered on the showroom floor. Daniel, Melissa, Nicole, the 2 newer associates Brandon had hired, Gary Torres, Rebecca Anderson. I've been offered another role in the company. I'm taking it. Daniel will move into the interim floor manager position starting next week. Regional is conducting a formal search for a permanent AGM, and Daniel will be considered for that role. Pause. The room was silent. I want to say something before we move on. 6 weeks ago, I walked into Robert Walker's office not knowing whether I could do this job. I didn't have the resume for it. I didn't have the experience. He looked around at all of them. What I had was one instruction from the man who gave me the role: run this floor the way you'd want to be treated in it. I tried to do that. You helped me. Every one of you. Daniel, you pushed back. I needed that. You made me better. Daniel, who'd been standing with his arms crossed, uncrossed them, nodded once. Melissa, you changed. Actually changed. That took courage. Melissa pressed her lips together. Good luck. You were better at this than I expected. That might be the nicest thing you've said to me. She almost smiled. Don't push it. Nicole, you set the pace for every new person we brought in, and you did it without being asked. Gary, thank you for the respect. Meant more than you know. Gary gave the full nod, the one that meant something settled. Rebecca, there should be a job title for what you actually do here, because it's at least 4 jobs. Make sure whoever comes in next understands that immediately. Rebecca smiled, a real smile, rare for her. I'll prepare a document. Brandon's last official day at Crown Luxury was a Friday. He'd already packed up his office, which hadn't taken long since he'd never really moved into it. At 4:30 p.m. he drove across town to the East Portland Service Center. It was busy. All 8 bays full. Customers in the waiting area. The smell of oil and brake cleaner and honest work. Robert Walker stood at the intake desk wearing a polo shirt with the Hayes Automotive logo, talking to a customer about an estimate. When the customer left, Robert looked up and saw Brandon. Brandon Flores, a GM of Crown Luxury. To what do I owe the honor? Not a GM anymore. Today's my last day. Robert's expression shifted. Leaving the company. Different role. Hayes Foundation, director position. Robert set down his clipboard. The foundation. The one that does workforce development. That's the one. Congratulations. That's important work. How is it here? Robert glanced around the service center. You know what I missed? I thought I'd miss the level, the prestige, the suits and the chandeliers, and the commission on 6-figure deals. Pause. I did miss it. For about 2 weeks. And now I'm learning what it feels like to actually be useful. Down here, the problem is in front of you. Car won't start. Brakes are bad. You fix it or you don't. Customer leaves with their car working or they don't. He looked at Brandon. It's cleaner, more honest. Brandon nodded. Pamela, the current foundation director. She said something similar. About being close to the people you're serving. Smart woman. I heard about the workforce training program, the one in the news last month. Put 63 people into trade jobs in 8 weeks. Was that you? That was Pamela's program. I just helped roll it into the next city. Robert was quiet for a moment. I know what that kind of program means. For some of those people, that's the whole thing. That's the door that opens. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Robert put out his hand. Brandon shook it, not across a hierarchy. As two people who'd both come down from altitude and discovered the ground felt steadier. Take care of yourself, Robert. You too, Brandon. Go do something that matters. Brandon had been full director of the Hayes Foundation for 6 months. The foundation offices on the 28th floor had slowly become his. Pamela's touches were still there. The filing system, the contact protocols, the framed photo of the first graduating class from the Detroit program. But Brandon had added his own, a whiteboard for tracking program metrics, a photo of his mother on his desk, a map of all 11 cities with colored pins marking program locations. Brandon's signature initiative, the one he'd proposed in his first month, the one the board had provisionally approved, was called the Bridge Program. It addressed a gap Pamela had identified in the Pittsburgh location, but hadn't had time to fully develop the window between completing a training program and securing a first job. The window where most people fell through the floor because there was nothing holding them up. The Bridge Program provided temporary housing stipends up to 3 months. Interview clothing, professional wardrobe, shoes. Transportation passes, bus, train, or gas cards. Emergency childcare so parents could attend interviews. Resume review and mock interview practice. Direct placement services with partner employers. In 6 months, the program had placed 94 people into stable employment across all 11 cities. 94 people who might have completed training but never made it to employment because they couldn't afford professional clothes, or couldn't get to interviews without a car, or couldn't find childcare for the 3 hours it took to interview and do paperwork. Brandon kept all 94 names in a spreadsheet. Read through them sometimes when the work felt overwhelming. Reminded himself what the numbers meant. The annual board meeting happened on a Tuesday in late April. Pamela sat in the back row, retired now, but attending as an observer the way teachers sit at the back of a classroom the year after they've retired. Brandon presented the 12-month plan. $48 million budget, 11 cities, programs in workforce development, early education, re-entry support for formerly incarcerated people, and the Bridge Program expansion, a proposal to scale it to 15 cities by next year. He explained it the way he'd learned to explain things from Pamela, not just the numbers, but the reason underneath the numbers, the human logic that made the numbers mean something. 168 people completed our workforce training programs last year. 117 of them are currently employed. That's a 70% placement rate. He clicked to the next slide. But 51 people, 30%, completed the program and didn't find employment. We interviewed them to understand why. The slide showed the breakdown. 43% couldn't afford professional clothing for interviews. 38% had transportation barriers. 31% needed childcare during interview times. 27% didn't know how to translate their training into resume language. The Bridge Program addresses all of these barriers. In 6 months, we've placed 94 people. That's 94 families with income. 94 people paying rent, buying groceries, building stability. He paused. The cost per placement is $1,180. The average starting salary for our placements is $42,000 annually. That's a 35-to-1 return in first-year earnings alone. The expansion was approved unanimously. After the meeting, board members approached Brandon to shake his hand, ask questions, offer congratulations. After the room cleared, James found Brandon near the windows looking down at the city below. They could see Riverside Elementary School from here. The mural Ashley had helped paint, an ocean deep blue, was visible on the side of the building. You did well today. The board did most of the work. They already believed in the mission. I just had to show them the plan. That's all leadership ever is, showing people the plan clearly enough that their belief has somewhere to go. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment looking at the mural. Ashley painted part of that. The ocean. She's 11 now, still wants to be a marine biologist. The race car driver thing faded. Brandon smiled. She's got time. She does. James, thank you for walking into Crown Luxury in an old white shirt. James looked at him. I was genuinely there to buy the car. I know. That's not what I mean. James was quiet for a moment. Then, you were the only one who didn't laugh. That's not a small thing. It seemed like the minimum. It always does. To the people who do it, it always seems like the minimum. That's how you know they're the right ones. 1 year later, updates arrived in the quiet accumulation of small victories that don't make headlines but change lives. Melissa Rodriguez, still at Crown Luxury, changed, genuinely. Her sales numbers were actually better. Now turns out patience and empathy increase close rates. She volunteered with the Foundation's interview prep program on weekends. Daniel Nguyen promoted to permanent general manager of Crown Luxury, running the floor better than Robert ever did. James did occasional test walk-ins. Daniel's team passed every time. Robert Walker, still at the service center, turned down an offer to return to showroom management. I like fixing actual problems, is his answer when people ask why. Ashley Martinez, 12 years old, still loved the ocean. The birthday Serpente was parked in James's garage, preserved. She sat in it sometimes to think about fish. Brandon Flores Hayes, Foundation Director. The Bridge program had placed 187 people in stable employment across 15 cities, named Nonprofit Director of the Year by Portland Business Journal. He still kept his mother's photo on his desk, still texted her disconnected number sometimes. Mom, I'm doing the thing that costs something. You were right. You were always right. Brandon's phone buzzed. Text from James. Ashley wants to FaceTime you about bioluminescent anglerfish. I'm passing the torch. Enjoy the 90-minute lecture. Jay. Brandon laughed. Accepted the call. Ashley's face filled the screen, eyes bright with excitement. Brandon. Did you know the anglerfish has a light bulb on its head that's actually a bacteria colony? Brandon leaned back in his chair, smiling. I did not know that, Ashley. Tell me everything. It makes you wonder. How many times do we judge people in the first 30 seconds? How many James Martinez walk into rooms every day and we never see them? How many Brandon Flores do the right thing when nobody's watching? And we never know. Have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Or have you been the Brandon, the person who chose not to laugh when everyone else did? Tell us in the comments below. I want to hear your story. Character doesn't need an audience. It doesn't flinch under pressure. It doesn't fold when tested. It simply waits, patient and steady and certain, for the room to catch up. And when the room finally does catch up, everything changes.